You poured the wine. You watched him drink. And now, you're here, hoping sleep comes easier than justice. Welcome back to Brutal History for Sleep, where the past is quiet, the blood is dry, and your part in it all stays between us. If the sound of whispered treason helps you drift off, go ahead and like, subscribe, and tell me where in the world you're listening from, and what hour your conscience finally went quiet. Tonight's tale is yours. You stood behind the throne, you smiled, you waited, and when the time was right, you ended a dynasty with nothing but timing, poison, and a borrowed ring. They'll say it was the Persians, or divine punishment, but you and I know better. Close your eyes. The world around you softens. The low hum of the AC, the slow rhythm of your breath, the sheets pulled high like a secret. You're warm, safe, unseen, but not innocent. Now, the stone floor is cool beneath your sandals. Oil lamps flicker along the palace corridor. You pass a priest who does not meet your eyes. He knows better. The air smells of frankincense and something bitter underneath, the poison still tucked inside your sleeve. You hear his voice behind the curtain. Still alive, still powerful, but not for long. Alexandria, 44 BC. You would think that being the most powerful woman in the world would come with certain perks. Chief among them, one might assume, would be the luxury of not having to poison your own brother over breakfast. Yet here you are, Cleopatra VII, descendant of Alexander's most successful general, fluent in 9 languages, patron of the greatest library in the world, contemplating the precise dosage of hemlock extract required to rid yourself of one thoroughly inconvenient sibling. The morning light streaming through the palace windows catches the gold inlay of your breakfast table, illuminating what lesser mortals might consider a feast fit for the gods. Dates from Jericho, honey cakes from Cyprus, wine that cost more than most people's annual income, and seated across from you, the source of all your current difficulties, your brother Ptolemy XIV, aged 15 and blissfully unaware that his sister is mentally calculating his body weight. "Sister," he says, gesturing expansively with a piece of bread dripping imported olive oil, "I've been thinking about the succession." Of course he has. You manage not to choke on your wine, which would be ironic given the circumstances. Have you, dear brother? Yes, I believe it's time we discussed Caesarion's position. The way he says it, you'd think your 4-year-old son had personally insulted him. Surely you understand that Egypt requires legitimate heirs, not... He pauses, searching for the most diplomatic way to call your child a bastard. Not children whose paternity remains uncertain. Uncertain. You resist the urge to laugh. Julius Caesar himself acknowledged the boy, but apparently that carries less weight than the opinion of a teenager who still hasn't figured out how to properly tie his royal urias. Caesarion is my son, you say calmly, and therefore of the bloodline of the Ptolemies. His legitimacy is unquestioned. By you, perhaps. Ptolemy VIII takes another bite, chewing thoughtfully. But what of Rome? What of the people? What of the priests? Ah, there it is, the priests. Your dear brother has been making friends in the temples, has he? No doubt they've been filling his young head with dreams of sole rulership, of removing the inconvenient sister who thinks she can govern Egypt without their constant approval. The priests, you say, serve the gods, and the gods have blessed our dynasty for 3 centuries. Yes, but sister, consider the practical matters. If something were to happen to you... He spreads his hands in a gesture of mock concern. Caesarion is too young to rule. The regency would naturally fall to me. Would it not be simpler to formalize this arrangement now? You set down your wine cup with perhaps more force than necessary. Are you suggesting I abdicate? I'm suggesting we plan for the future. And the future, dear sister, may require difficult choices. Difficult choices. The boy has no idea how difficult choices can be. He's 15, raised in luxury, tutored by the finest minds in Alexandria, and his greatest concern until recently was whether his ceremonial leopard skin was properly spotted. Now he sits there, proposing to remove your son from the succession, as if dynastic politics were as simple as rearranging furniture. The irony is not lost on you that this conversation is taking place over breakfast. The Ptolemies have always been a family that conducted business over meals. Usually, however, the business didn't involve quite so much potential fratricide. Brother, you say, your voice carrying that particular tone that has made Roman senators reconsider their positions. I appreciate your concern for the dynasty, but I think you underestimate both Caesarian's significance and my own commitment to Egypt's future. Oh, I don't underestimate your commitment, he replies, and there's something in his tone that suggests your little brother is not quite as naive as you'd hoped. I simply wonder if your personal attachments might cloud your judgment. Personal attachments, as if loving your son were a character flaw, as if the alliance with Julius Caesar, an alliance that had kept Egypt independent when every other kingdom had fallen to Rome, were merely a romantic dalliance. My judgment, you say, has kept Egypt prosperous and independent for 7 years. I believe the results speak for themselves. Yes, but at what cost? He leans forward, and you realize with a start that he's been planning this conversation. Sister, you've tied Egypt's fate to Rome's. First Caesar, now this business with Mark Antony. What happens when Rome turns on us? What happens when the Romans decide they no longer need the Ptolemies? The question hangs in the air like incense smoke. It's not an unreasonable concern. It's the same question that keeps you awake at night, the same calculation that drives every decision you make. But coming from Ptolemy the 14th, it sounds less like strategic thinking and more like a prepared speech. And you believe, you say carefully, that your approach would be different. I believe, he says, that Egypt's future lies in Egyptian hands, not Roman ones. Egyptian hands. Your Egyptian hands have been managing quite well, thank you. But you suspect he means different Egyptian hands, specifically his. The morning light has shifted now, throwing long shadows across the breakfast table. In the distance, you can hear the sounds of Alexandria waking up. Merchants calling their wares, ships arriving at the harbour, the eternal bustle of the greatest city in the world. All of it depending on the decisions made in this room, by the people sitting at this table. I see, you say finally. And Anna, have you discussed this vision with anyone else? I've spoken with some of the priests and certain members of the court. They share my concerns about the dynasty's future. Of course they do. Nothing like a teenage pharaoh to get the ambitious courtiers excited about their prospects. You can practically see them now, whispering in corners, calculating who might benefit from a change in leadership. How thoughtful of them, you murmur. And what exactly do they propose? Just simply that we formalize the succession, that we acknowledge reality, that we prepare for the future. Reality. The reality is that your brother is 15 years old, politically naive, and apparently under the impression that governing Egypt is a matter of good intentions and proper bloodlines. The reality is that Rome is in chaos following Caesar's assassination, and Egypt's survival depends on navigating that chaos with considerably more skill than your brother currently possesses. The reality is that you've just realized your brother intends to remove both you and Caesarion from power, probably sooner rather than later. Well, you say, rising from the table, this has been illuminating. I shall certainly give your suggestions the consideration they deserve. I hope you will, sister, for all our sakes. You smile at him, the same smile you've used on Roman senators and Parthian ambassadors, the smile that promises nothing and threatens everything. Oh, dear brother, you can be quite certain that I will. As you leave the breakfast chamber, your mind is already working through the possibilities. Ptolemy IV has made his position clear. He wants sole rule, he has support from the priests and courtiers, and he views both you and Caesarion as obstacles to be removed. The question is not whether he'll act on these intentions, but when. You could, of course, simply have him arrested. Treason is treason after all, and royal brothers have been imprisoned for less. But that would create martyrs, and martyrs have a tendency to inspire rebellion. Better to solve the problem more, permanently. The thought should horrify you. It should give you pause, make you reconsider, force you to search for alternatives. After all, this is your brother. You've shared meals with him, taught him to read hieroglyphs, watched him grow from a child into whatever he is now. But as you walk through the palace corridors, past the frescoes depicting 3 centuries of Ptolemaic rule, You find yourself thinking not about family bonds, but about survival. Egypt's survival. Caesarian's survival. Your own survival. You could take up embroidery, of course, or perhaps astronomy. Learn to appreciate the finer points of poetry. Dedicate yourself to philosophical contemplation. But no, you chose to be Pharaoh. And pharaohs, as your ancestors learned, sometimes face unpleasant necessities. The question is not whether you will act, the question is how. As you reach your private chambers, you pause at the window overlooking the harbour. Alexandria spreads out before you, magnificent and eternal, the greatest city in the world. All of it your responsibility, all of it dependent on the choices you make. You turn away from the window and begin to plan. 3 days later. If there's one thing the Ptolemies have always excelled at, it's making the impossible seem inevitable. Take, for instance, the delicate matter of acquiring poison in sufficient quantity to eliminate a teenage pharaoh while maintaining plausible deniability. Most people, faced with such a challenge, might resort to crude methods, hiring assassins, arranging accidents, or simply having the inconvenient party fed to the crocodiles. But you are not most people. You are Cleopatra VII. And when you decide to commit fratricide, you do it with style. The first step, naturally, is research. The Great Library of Alexandria contains the world's most comprehensive collection of medical texts, including several fascinating treatises on plant toxicology. You spend a pleasant morning in the company of Dioscorides' work on medicinal plants, ostensibly preparing for a discussion with the court physicians about improving the health of the royal family. Such concern for family welfare is touching, really. Hemlock, you discover, has several advantages as a poison of choice. It's readily available. Cyprus has excellent hemlock groves, and trade with Cyprus is routine. It's difficult to detect in food, particularly when mixed with strong flavors. Most importantly, it produces symptoms that can easily be mistaken for a variety of natural illnesses. The Greeks, you note with professional appreciation, have been using hemlock for executions for centuries. If it was good enough for Socrates, it's certainly good enough for an inconvenient brother. The second step is acquisition. This proves simpler than expected. Cyprus has been part of Egypt's sphere of influence for decades, and Cypriot merchants are frequent visitors to Alexandria. One such merchant, a fellow named Nicomedes, who specializes in rare plants and medicines, proves remarkably accommodating when you express interest in acquiring various exotic specimens for the palace gardens. Hemlock, he muses, stroking his beard thoughtfully. Dangerous plant, Your Majesty. Are you certain? I'm researching natural remedies, you explain smoothly. The court physicians have expressed interest in expanding their knowledge of foreign plants, purely academic, of course. Of course. His smile suggests he understands perfectly well that your interest is anything but academic. I can provide fresh extracts, properly prepared, very educational. The price he quotes is outrageous, but then again, you're not exactly shopping for household goods. You pay without complaint, and he promises delivery within the week. Discretion, you mention casually, is always appreciated in matters of scholarly research. Naturally, Your Majesty, I deal exclusively with discriminating patrons. Excellent. Nothing like a corrupt merchant to ensure proper service. The third step, and this is where the real artistry comes in, is preparation. Not just of the poison itself, but of the entire scenario. Ptolemy V must die, but his death must appear natural, unfortunate, and above all, not your fault. This requires what the Greeks call proskinesis, careful attention to every detail of the performance. You begin by expressing increased concern for your brother's health. During court sessions, you make subtle references to his pale complexion, his apparent fatigue, his lack of appetite. When courtiers comment on these observations, you respond with sisterly worry. I do hope he's not overworking himself, you confide to the high priest of Ptah. He's been so dedicated to his studies lately, so concerned with affairs of state. Sometimes I wonder if the burden of rulership weighs too heavily on his young shoulders. The priest nods sympathetically. The gods appreciate devotion, Your Majesty, but wisdom includes knowing one's limits. Exactly my thoughts. Perhaps I should consult with the physicians about a tonic, something to strengthen his constitution? A prudent precaution, Your Majesty. By the end of the week, half the court is discussing the poor prince's delicate health. You've established the narrative before the actual illness begins. When Ptolemy IV starts showing symptoms of hemlock poisoning, everyone will remember how fragile he'd been appearing lately. The fourth step is logistics. Hemlock needs to be administered regularly over several days to be effective, while maintaining the appearance of natural illness. This means access to your brother's food and drink on a consistent basis. Fortunately, Ptolemy IV has always been particular about his meals. He insists on having his food prepared by his personal cook, served on his favourite dishes, and accompanied by his preferred wine. Routine is your friend in this situation. You arrange for the cook to receive special ingredients for preparing traditional Egyptian dishes. The story you tell is simple. You've been corresponding with temples throughout Egypt, collecting ancient recipes to honour the gods during the upcoming festivals. The cook, a patriotic sort, is delighted to participate in this cultural preservation project. Beehive spices, you explain, handing him a collection of small packages, are prepared according to the old ways. This one, you indicate a particular packet, is for enhancing meat dishes, very traditional. The priests of Memphis recommended it especially. The cook examines the packet with professional interest. It has an unusual aroma, Your Majesty. Yes, it's a blend of several herbs, quite distinctive. I'm told it was favoured by the early Ptolemies. I shall be honoured to use it, Your Majesty. The packet, of course, contains hemlock extract mixed with conventional spices. The cook's enthusiasm for historical authenticity will ensure its regular use. The fifth step is establishing your alibi. When Ptolemy IV begins showing symptoms, you need to be visibly concerned, actively seeking help, and demonstrably innocent of any wrongdoing. You arrange for a series of meetings with various priests, ostensibly to discuss upcoming religious festivals. You schedule consultations with the court physicians about general health matters. You even arrange for a visit from a renowned mathematician from Rhodes, supposedly to discuss calendar calculations. The goal is to be constantly busy, constantly visible, constantly engaged in activities that have nothing to do with murder. The sixth step, and this is where your appreciation for irony truly shines, is preparation for the investigation that will inevitably follow. Someone will ask questions. Someone will want to know how a healthy teenage pharaoh suddenly developed a fatal illness. Someone will need to be satisfied with the answers. You begin by preparing those answers in advance. The forged letters that will implicate the Roman observer require careful work. They must be convincing enough to satisfy casual inspection, but not so perfect as to arouse suspicion. You spend several evenings practicing the handwriting, aging the papyrus, selecting the proper ink. The content is delicate, treasonous enough to justify suspicion, but not so outrageous as to be unbelievable. The Syrian glass vials that will be discovered in the Romans' quarters need to be properly prepared. You acquire them through a jewellery merchant who regularly imports decorative items from the East. The story is that you're commissioning a special perfume blend for diplomatic gifts. The vials are beautiful, distinctive, and completely innocent, until they're found in the wrong place with traces of the wrong substances. The seventh step is contingency planning. What if the poison doesn't work as expected? What if your brother survives but becomes suspicious? What if the investigation goes in unexpected directions? You prepare for these possibilities by cultivating alternative suspects. The Roman observer is obvious, but you also begin spreading subtle doubts about certain courtiers, particularly those who've been vocal about supporting your brother's recent political initiatives. I do hope you mention to your most trusted advisor that the court physicians are being careful about their medicines. Some of the younger members seem quite experimental in their approaches. Your Majesty suspects incompetence. I suspect enthusiasm. Sometimes the desire to prove oneself can lead to unfortunate mistakes. Seeds of doubt, planted carefully, grow into suspicion when watered with mysterious circumstances. The eighth step is the hardest, maintaining the performance. You must continue to behave as a loving sister, a concerned co-ruler, a devoted member of the royal family. You must show appropriate emotion at appropriate times, ask appropriate questions, and demonstrate appropriate ignorance of anything suspicious. This is perhaps the most challenging aspect of the entire enterprise. Not because you lack acting ability. 7 years of dealing with Roman politicians has honed your skills considerably, but because the performance requires sustained commitment. One slip, one moment of inappropriate knowledge or suspicious behavior, and the entire carefully constructed narrative collapses. You practice expressions of concern in your mirror, you rehearse conversations with imaginary physicians, you prepare to be shocked, saddened, and bewildered by the tragic turn of events. The final step is waiting. The poison has been acquired, the delivery method established, the alibis prepared, the evidence planted, the suspects identified, and the performance planned. Now you must wait for the proper moment to begin. You choose the start of the Opet festival, when the palace will be busy with religious ceremonies and visiting dignitaries. The chaos will provide cover for any unusual activities, and the religious significance will add gravity to whatever happens. As you prepare for bed on the night before the festival begins, you reflect on the elaborate preparations of the past week. Most people, contemplating murder, probably don't put quite so much thought into the details. But then again, most people aren't attempting to eliminate a pharaoh while maintaining the fiction of natural death. You've always been thorough in your work. It's one of the qualities that's made you successful as a ruler. Why should fratricide be any different? Tomorrow, you'll begin the final phase of your brother's education. He wanted to discuss the succession after all. You're simply ensuring that the lesson is memorable. Day 1 of the Opet Festival. There's a certain satisfaction in watching your plans unfold with the precision of a well-choreographed temple ritual. The morning of the festival dawns clear and bright, Alexandria's streets already filled with celebrants preparing for the day's ceremonies. The palace bustles with activity, priests arriving for the blessing of the sacred bark, dignitaries presenting themselves for the traditional audiences, servants rushing about with final preparations. Perfect chaos, in other words. Just the sort of environment in which unfortunate accidents can occur without drawing undue attention. You rise early, as befits a pharaoh's responsibilities during religious festivals. Your first official duty is to receive the high priest of Amun, who will conduct the morning's purification ceremonies. Your second, less official duty is to ensure that your brother's breakfast includes a generous portion of the traditional spices you've so thoughtfully provided to his cook. The timing is crucial. The hemlock extract needs to be administered early enough to take effect during the day's events, but not so early that symptoms appear before you've established your alibi. You've calculated that if Ptolemy the Corsasan consumes the poison with his morning meal, he should begin showing symptoms during the afternoon ceremonies, when you'll be visibly occupied with religious duties and surrounded by witnesses. You dress with particular care this morning, choosing the ceremonial robes that mark you as High Priestess of Isis. The symbolism is important. You must appear not just as a sister, but as a religious leader, a protector of sacred traditions, someone incapable of the kind of brutal pragmatism that characterizes political murder. The first hint that your carefully laid plans might require adjustment comes when you arrive at the breakfast chamber to find your brother already there, but not alone. Marcus Crassus's nephew, the Roman observer whose fate you've so carefully arranged, sits at the table sharing what appears to be an animated discussion about military tactics. "Sister!" Ptolemy IV greets you with unusual enthusiasm. "Marcus was just telling me about the new training methods they're using in the Roman legions. Fascinating stuff. Did you know they've developed techniques for siege warfare that can reduce a city's walls in half the time?" You smile graciously while internally cursing. The Roman is supposed to be conveniently absent this morning, attending to correspondence with his uncle. Instead, he's here, eating breakfast with your brother, creating complications for your carefully orchestrated timeline. How interesting, you say, settling into your usual seat. Military innovations are always educational. Marcus inclines his head respectfully. "Your Majesty, I was just explaining to His Majesty how Roman engineering has adapted to Egyptian construction techniques. The combination of Roman efficiency with Egyptian precision could revolutionize fortress design." "Indeed," you gesture to the servants who begin serving the morning meal. "I'm sure my brother finds such discussions illuminating." The problem, of course, is that with the Roman present, you can't be certain which dishes your brother will choose, or whether he'll consume enough of the poisoned food to achieve the desired effect. Worse, if Marcus shares any of the tainted dishes, You'll have inadvertently poisoned your intended scapegoat, which would rather defeat the purpose of the exercise. You watch with growing concern as the servants present the various dishes. The meat, seasoned with your special blend of traditional spices and hemlock extract, sits prominently in the center of the table. Both men reach for it. "This smells wonderful," Marcus comments, cutting a generous portion. "Egyptian cuisine really is remarkable." Omar Cook has been experimenting with ancient recipes. Ptolemy IV explains. Sister has been collecting traditional dishes from temples throughout Egypt. A wonderful way to honor our heritage. "How thoughtful," Marcus agrees, taking a bite. "The seasoning is quite distinctive." You manage to maintain your composure while silently calculating the implications. If the Roman dies of hemlock poisoning, it will be considerably more difficult to frame him for your brother's death. Dead scapegoats, while convenient in some ways, tend to raise awkward questions about timing and motivation. "Yes," you say carefully. The cook has been quite enthusiastic about the project. Perhaps too enthusiastic. Some of the spice combinations are rather intense. "I find it quite pleasant," Marcus says, helping himself to another portion. Of course he does. Romans and their famously adventurous palates. You excuse yourself briefly, ostensibly to check on preparations for the morning ceremony, but actually to intercept the cook before he can serve any more of the tainted dishes. "The spice blend I gave you," you tell him quietly, "I think it may be too strong. Perhaps we should reserve it for special occasions only." "But your Majesty," both His Majesty and the Roman gentleman seem to enjoy it. "Yes, well, sometimes diplomatic courtesy requires pretending to enjoy things that are challenging. Let's prepare something milder for future meals." You return to the breakfast chamber to find the conversation has shifted to Egyptian architecture. Marcus is expressing admiration for the engineering that went into the Great Library, while Ptolemy XIV is explaining the mathematical principles behind pyramid construction. "The precision is remarkable," Marcus says. "Roman architects could learn much from Egyptian methods." "Knowledge should be shared," your brother replies. "That's what makes Alexandria great, bringing together the best ideas from all cultures. Diplomatic, thoughtful, thoroughly inconvenient." You spend the rest of the meal making polite conversation while mentally adjusting your timeline. Both men have consumed the poisoned food, which means both will likely begin showing symptoms within hours. This creates several problems. First, if Marcus becomes ill at the same time as Ptolemy IV, it will be difficult to claim that he poisoned your brother. Simultaneous poisoning suggests a common source, not targeted murder. Second, if Marcus dies, you'll need a new scapegoat. The carefully forged letters and planted evidence will be wasted. Third, if Marcus survives but becomes suspicious about the timing of his illness, he might begin asking inconvenient questions about shared meals and common food sources. You need to adjust your strategy, and quickly. After breakfast, you arrange for Marcus to receive an urgent message requiring his immediate attention. The message, delivered by one of your most trusted servants, claims that a ship has arrived from Rome with important correspondence from his uncle. "I'm terribly sorry to interrupt your discussions," you tell him, "but the captain insists the documents are time-sensitive." Marcus rises immediately. "Of course, Your Majesty. Duty calls." Perfect. With Marcus safely away from the palace, you can proceed with the next phase of your plan. If he becomes ill from the hemlock, it will happen elsewhere, allowing you to maintain the fiction that your brother was specifically targeted. The morning ceremony proceeds without incident. You perform your duties as High Priestess with appropriate solemnity, blessing the sacred bark and leading the procession to the harbour. The crowds are enthusiastic, the priests are satisfied, and you maintain perfect composure, despite the knowledge that your brother is slowly being poisoned. It's during the midday break, as you're changing from ceremonial robes into more practical attire, that your servant Apollodorus brings the first news. "Your Majesty, the Roman observer has sent word that he's been delayed. Apparently he's feeling unwell and wishes to postpone his planned afternoon meetings." "Oh dear," you reply, managing to sound appropriately concerned. "I hope it's nothing serious. I'm told it's probably just fatigue from the morning's activities. The heat can be challenging for foreigners." "Indeed. Please send word that he should rest as long as necessary. His health is more important than any meetings." With Marcus safely indisposed, you turn your attention to the afternoon's events. The second ceremony requires both you and Ptolemy XIV to participate in the blessing of the sacred animals. It's a lengthy ritual, involving multiple processions, elaborate prayers, and considerable standing in the sun. If the timing works as planned, your brother should begin showing symptoms of hemlock poisoning sometime during the ceremony. The heat, the physical exertion, and the public nature of the event will provide perfect cover for his distress. You arrive at the temple to find Ptolemy XIV already there, looking perhaps slightly pale but otherwise normal. He greets you with his usual courtesy, makes appropriate small talk with the priests, and takes his place for the opening prayers. The ceremony begins with the blessing of the sacred ibis. You and your brother stand side by side, reciting the ancient words while the priests perform their rituals. Everything appears normal. Then, halfway through the blessing of the sacred cats, you notice your brother swaying slightly. His face has taken on a greyish tinge, and there's a light sheen of perspiration on his forehead. "Brother," you whisper, "are you feeling well?" "I'm fine," he replies, but his voice lacks its usual strength. "Just the heat. Perhaps you should sit down for a moment." "No, I'm fine. Really?" But he's not fine. Over the next hour, his condition deteriorates visibly. The pallor deepens, the sweating increases, and his hands begin to tremble. By the time you reach the final blessing, he's clearly struggling to maintain his composure. The priests, naturally, are beginning to notice. Whispered conversations start at the edges of the crowd. Concerned glances are exchanged. The careful performance you've orchestrated is beginning to draw exactly the kind of attention you need. "Your Majesty," the high priest approaches you discreetly. His Majesty appears to be experiencing some distress. "Yes, I've noticed. Perhaps we should summon the physicians." "An excellent idea." The rest of the ceremony is abbreviated. Ptolemy XIV is escorted back to the palace, supported by 2 servants and accompanied by increasing expressions of concern from the assembled crowd. You follow, maintaining the perfect balance of worry and composure that the situation requires. The court physicians arrive within minutes of your return to the palace. You watch from the doorway as they examine your brother, noting symptoms, asking questions, and exchanging meaningful looks. "Bit exhaustion," the senior physician announces after his examination. "Not uncommon during festival days. Rest and cool drinks should resolve the problem." "You're certain?" you ask. "Quite certain, Your Majesty. The symptoms are typical. His Majesty has been working very hard lately, and the ceremonial duties in this heat can be taxing." You nod, accepting the diagnosis while knowing it's completely wrong. Hemlock poisoning mimics heat exhaustion in its early stages, but the symptoms will worsen over the next few hours, progressing to muscle weakness, respiratory distress, and eventually paralysis. The physicians prescribe rest and fluids, then withdraw to let your brother sleep. You remain in the chamber, playing the role of concerned sister, occasionally checking his pulse and temperature, ensuring that servants are available to meet his needs. "Sister," Ptolemy Chaos says weakly, "I'm sorry about this morning, about the succession discussion. Don't concern yourself with such things now," you reply gently. "Rest is what you need. But I want you to know, I never meant to suggest. I respect your position, your experience. I was just thinking about the future, I understand. Yes, but perhaps I was presumptuous. Perhaps I should have consulted with you more carefully before speaking with the priests." Touching. Your brother is apologizing for his attempted coup while dying from the poison you've administered. There's something almost poetic about it. "Rest now," you tell him. "We can discuss politics when you're feeling better." But of course, he won't be feeling better. The hemlock is working its way through his system, and by morning the succession question will be definitively resolved. As evening approaches, you withdraw to your own chambers, leaving instructions for the servants to summon you if your brother's condition changes. You need to be seen sleeping peacefully, uninvolved in whatever developments might occur during the night. The performance continues, even when there's no audience, especially when there's no audience. Day 2 of the Opet Festival. You wake to the sound of running footsteps in the corridor outside your chamber. The quality of the disturbance, urgent but hushed, the kind of controlled panic that characterizes palace emergencies, tells you immediately that your brother's condition has taken its expected turn for the worse. The servant who knocks at your door is Apollodorus. his face carefully composed in the expression of someone bearing grave news. "Your Majesty," he says quietly, "the physicians request your immediate presence." His Majesty has taken a turn for the worse. You rise quickly, pulling on your robe with what you hope appears to be appropriate haste. "What's happened?" "His condition deteriorated during the night. The physicians are concerned." The walk to Ptolemy IV's chambers feels appropriately solemn. Palace servants line the corridors, their faces reflecting the gravity of the situation. Word has clearly spread that something serious is happening to the young pharaoh. You enter the chamber to find it crowded with physicians, priests, and palace officials. The scene is exactly what you'd hoped for: organized chaos, multiple witnesses, and clear evidence that every possible effort is being made to save your brother's life. Ptolemy XIV lies on his bed, barely conscious, his breathing shallow and irregular. The hemlock has done its work with characteristic efficiency. His face is pale, almost grey, and his limbs appear to have lost most of their strength. The physicians hover around him, checking his pulse, examining his eyes, and exchanging worried glances. "Sister," he whispers when he sees you approach. His voice is barely audible. "I'm here," you reply, taking his hand. It's cold and clammy, exactly as you'd expect from hemlock poisoning. "The physicians are doing everything they can." I don't understand what's happening. Yesterday I felt fine, and now?" "Illness can strike suddenly," you say gently. "You must conserve your strength." The senior physician approaches you discreetly. "Your Majesty, I must speak with you." You follow him to a corner of the chamber, out of earshot of the other observers. "What is it?" "His Majesty's condition is unusual. The symptoms don't match our initial diagnosis of heat exhaustion. We're seeing signs of something more serious." "What kind of signs?" "Muscle weakness, respiratory distress, and—" He pauses, choosing his words carefully. "Certain neurological symptoms that suggest possible poisoning." "Poison? Perfect. The physicians are reaching the correct conclusion on their own, which eliminates any suspicion that you've guided their diagnosis." "Poisoning," you repeat, allowing appropriate shock to colour your voice. "Are you certain?" "We can't be certain without further investigation, but the symptoms are consistent with several known toxins." "What kind of toxins?" "Plant-based compounds, most likely. There are several possibilities, but the progression of symptoms suggests something like hemlock or aconite." You feel a moment of professional satisfaction. The physicians are competent, observant, and arriving at the correct diagnosis through their own expertise. This will make their testimony much more credible during the inevitable investigation. Could this have been accidental, you ask? Possible, but unlikely. These substances don't occur naturally in prepared food. Someone would have had to introduce them deliberately. You're suggesting that someone tried to poison my brother. I'm suggesting that the symptoms are consistent with deliberate poisoning, yes. The implications hang in the air like incense smoke. If Ptolemy XIV has been poisoned, then someone in the palace is guilty of attempted murder. The question is, who and why? "What should we do?" you ask. "Continue treatment, though I must warn you that the prognosis is not encouraging, and perhaps we should consider investigating how this might have happened." "Of course, whatever is necessary." You return to your brother's bedside, where the gathered officials are maintaining their vigil. The high priests are murmuring prayers. The court officials are exchanging worried glances, and the servants are doing their best to appear useful while staying out of the way. "How is he?" asks the high priest of Ptah. "The physicians believe he may have been poisoned," you reply quietly. The words spread through the chamber like ripples in a pond. Faces pale, conversations stop, and suddenly everyone is looking at everyone else with new suspicion. "Poisoned?" the priest repeats. "Are they certain?" "The symptoms are consistent with it. They're continuing their investigation." "But who would do such a thing?" "This," you say grimly, "is what we need to find out." The next few hours pass in a blur of activity. Messages are sent to summon additional physicians from Memphis and Thebes. The palace is quietly secured, with guards posted at all entrances and exits. The servants who prepared your brother's meals are questioned, though discreetly, to avoid spreading panic. You spend most of the time at Ptolemy Captoli's bedside, maintaining the vigil that duty requires. His condition continues to deteriorate. exactly as the hemlock's progression would predict. The muscle weakness spreads, his breathing becomes more labored, and his periods of consciousness become shorter and less coherent. It's during one of these brief moments of consciousness that he asks the question you've been dreading. "Sister," he whispers, "who would want to hurt me?" The question hangs between you, heavy with implications. He's asking not just about the immediate situation, but about the broader political calculations that govern palace life. He's asking about enemies, about rivals, about people who might benefit from his death. "I don't know," you reply honestly. After all, you're not telling him who would want to hurt him. You're telling him you don't know who else might want to hurt him. "The Roman," he says suddenly. "Marcus, he was at breakfast yesterday. He ate the same food." Your heart stops for a moment. This is not a connection you want your brother to make, at least not yet. The timing is wrong for that particular revelation. "Marcus became ill too," you say carefully. "He's been confined to his quarters since yesterday afternoon." "Sorry, it wasn't him." "It seems unlikely." "Then who?" It's a reasonable question. If the Roman didn't poison him, and if the symptoms began after breakfast, then someone else with access to his food must be responsible. The investigation will need to find someone to blame, and soon. "Perhaps," you suggest gently, "we should wait for the investigation to run its course before speculating." "But, sister, if someone is trying to kill me, they might try again. They might try to hurt you or Caesarion." The concern in his voice is genuine, which makes the situation even more ironic. Your brother is worried about your safety while dying from poison you've administered. Family loyalty is such a complicated thing. "The palace is secured," you assure him. "The guards are taking precautions. We'll find whoever is responsible." "Promise me," he says, gripping your hand with what strength he has left. "Promise me you'll protect Caesarion. Whatever happens to me, don't let them hurt him." "I promise." "And promise me you'll be careful, please. Egypt needs you." "I'll be careful." He relaxes slightly, seeming satisfied with your assurances. The irony is not lost on you that he's asking you to protect the very people whose interests you're advancing by killing him. As the day wears on, the political implications of the situation become increasingly clear. If Ptolemy XIV dies, you'll be sole ruler of Egypt, with Caesarion as your heir. The priests and courtiers who had been supporting your brother's ambitions will need to recalculate their positions. The Romans will need to adjust their diplomatic strategies. Most importantly, someone will need to be held responsible for the poisoning. The investigation will demand answers, and you'll need to provide them. The solution, you realize, is already in motion. Marcus, the Roman observer, is ill with the same symptoms as your brother. The forged letters implicating him in a plot against the Ptolemaic dynasty are already hidden in his quarters. The Syrian glass vials with traces of hemlock extract are ready to be discovered by the investigator. All you need to do is guide the investigation in the right direction. Late in the afternoon, you meet privately with the captain of the palace guard. The conversation is brief and to the point. "The physicians believe my brother was poisoned," you tell him. "I want you to conduct a thorough investigation." "Of course, Your Majesty." "Where would you like us to start?" "Anyone who had access to his food, the servants, the cooks, anyone who might have been in the kitchen or dining areas." "And the Roman observer? What about him?" "He's been ill since yesterday. Similar symptoms to His Majesty's." "Yes, I've been told." "What do you think that means?" "Either he was poisoned too, or he poisoned himself accidentally while administering the poison to His Majesty." "Perfect." The captain is reaching the correct conclusion on his own, which will make his testimony more credible. "That's a serious accusation," you say. "Yes, Your Majesty. But if the symptoms are identical, it suggests a common source. Either they were both targeted, or one of them was the intended victim, and the other was collateral damage." "I see. And you believe the Roman is the more likely culprit?" "With respect, Your Majesty, he's the obvious outsider. He has connections to Roman politics, he's been asking questions about Egyptian defences, and he's been meeting privately with various officials." "Has he indeed?" "Yes, Your Majesty, my men have been keeping track of his activities, as is standard for foreign visitors." "And what have they observed?" Several meetings with junior priests, some conversations with palace officials about administrative procedures, and considerable interest in the succession arrangements. The succession arrangements, of course. The captain is painting a picture of a Roman spy gathering intelligence about Egyptian politics, possibly with the intention of influencing the succession crisis. And I think, you say carefully, you should conduct a thorough search of his quarters. Discreetly, of course. We don't want to create a diplomatic incident without cause. Of course, Your Majesty. If we find evidence of wrongdoing, we'll inform you immediately. See that you do. As evening approaches, Ptolemy XIV's condition continues to deteriorate. The physicians have done everything they can, but hemlock poisoning has no antidote. The only treatment is supportive care, and even that is rarely effective once the symptoms progress to this stage. You remain at his bedside, holding his hand, occasionally whispering words of comfort. The assembled officials maintain their vigil, their faces reflecting the gravity of the situation. "Sister," Ptolemy the Exor's II whispers during one of his final moments of consciousness, "I'm sorry about our argument, about the succession. I didn't mean to question your judgment. I know. I wanted to help. I wanted to be useful. You were useful. You are useful. You're my brother. Take care of Egypt. Take care of Caesarion. Take care of yourself." "I will." "And sister?" "Yes. Find whoever did this. Make them pay." "I will." He squeezes your hand weakly, then closes his eyes. His breathing becomes more labored, more irregular. The physicians hover nearby, checking his pulse, monitoring his condition, but there's nothing more they can do. Ptolemy XIV dies just after midnight, surrounded by the most powerful people in Egypt, all of whom are now witnesses to his peaceful passing. The reign of the last male Ptolemy has ended. The dynasty's future now rests entirely in your hands. As the physicians confirm his death and the priests begin the rituals for preparing his body, you allow yourself a moment of genuine grief. Whatever political necessities drove your actions, Ptolemy XIV was your brother. You shared a childhood, a heritage, and a burden that few people could understand. But grief is a luxury you can't afford for long. There's an investigation to guide, a succession to secure, and a kingdom to govern. This is the kingdom. This is how the kingdom survive. The real work is just beginning. Night of day 2. Early morning, day 3. The palace has settled into the eerie quiet that comes with watching someone die. You've dismissed most of the officials, keeping only the essential physicians and a few trusted servants. The vigil continues, but now it's more intimate. Just you, the dying pharaoh, and the inexorable progression of hemlock through his system. Ptolemy the courtier drifts in and out of consciousness, his breathing becoming more labored with each passing hour. The physicians hover nearby, checking his pulse, monitoring his condition. But there's nothing more they can do. Hemlock poisoning has no antidote, and once the symptoms progress this far, the outcome is inevitable. "Sister," he whispers during one of his lucid moments, around midnight. "I'm cold." You pull the coverlet higher, knowing that the chill he feels comes from within, not from the warm Alexandrian night. The physicians say that's normal. Your body is fighting the illness. Am I going to die? The question hangs in the air. You could lie, offer false hope, maintain the pretense that he might recover, but looking at his grey complexion, his laboured breathing, his weakening grip on your hand, you realise that dishonesty would be pointless now. "The physicians are concerned," you say carefully. "You see." He's quiet for a moment, processing this information with the same thoughtful manner he's always brought to difficult subjects. "Sister, if I die, what happens to Egypt?" "You're not going to die," you lie smoothly. "But if something were to happen, the succession is clear. I would continue as pharaoh, with Caesarion as heir. The priests won't like that. Some of them think the male line should continue. The priests serve the gods, and the gods have blessed our family for 3 centuries. They'll accept what must be. And the Romans will continue to respect our alliance. Egypt's independence doesn't depend on which Ptolemy rules." He nods weakly, seeming satisfied with your assurances. But then his expression changes, becomes more focused despite his weakness. "Sister, I've been thinking about yesterday. About breakfast. Your heart rate increases slightly, though you maintain your composed exterior. What about it? Marcus was there. He ate the same food I did. If someone poisoned my food, wouldn't he have been poisoned too? Marcus did become ill, you remind him. He's been confined to his quarters since yesterday afternoon, but not as ill as me. Why would that be? It's a perceptive question, and one that you need to answer carefully. Perhaps he ate less of the tainted food, or perhaps his constitution is stronger. People react differently to illness. Perhaps. But he doesn't sound convinced. Sister, I want you to be very careful about the investigation. What do you mean? If someone tried to poison me and they failed, they might try again. They might try to hurt you or Caesarean. Promise me you'll be careful. I promise. And promise me something else. If you find out who did this, don't just have them executed. Find out why they did it. Find out if there are others. Find out if this is part of a larger plot. The irony of the situation is almost overwhelming. Your brother, dying from poison you've administered, is advising you on how to conduct the investigation into his own murder. I will, you say. I promise. He relaxes slightly, but the effort of speaking has exhausted him. His breathing becomes more shallow, more irregular. The physicians exchange meaningful looks. They can see what you can see. The end is approaching. The next few hours pass in a blur of medical activity and whispered conversations. Additional physicians arrive from the Temple of Thoth, summoned by messages sent earlier in the day. They examine your brother, confer with their colleagues, and reach the same conclusion. Poisoning, probably hemlock, and nothing more they can do. You maintain your vigil, holding his hand, occasionally speaking words of comfort. The assembled physicians and servants maintain their own vigil, witnesses to the death of the last male Ptolemy. As dawn approaches, Ptolemy Corbizuta's condition deteriorates rapidly. The muscle weakness that had been progressing steadily now affects his breathing. His lips take on a bluish tinge, and his grip on your hand becomes almost non-existent. Sister, he whispers, so quietly you have to lean close to hear him. I can't breathe properly. I know, the physicians say it's part of the illness. I'm scared. The admission breaks your heart, even as you know you're responsible for his fear. This is your brother, your co-ruler, your partner in the burden of governing Egypt. And he's dying because you decided his political ambitions were too dangerous to tolerate. I'm here, you tell him. I'm not going anywhere. Sister? I'm sorry about our argument, about the succession. I didn't mean to question your judgment. I know. I wanted to help. I wanted to be useful. You were useful. You are useful. You're my brother. Take care of Egypt. Take care of Caesarean. Take care of yourself. I will. And sister? Yes? Find whoever did this. Make them pay. He squeezes your hand with what little strength remains. Then his breathing becomes even more laboured. The physicians hover nearby, checking his pulse, monitoring his condition, but there's nothing more they can do. The sunrise begins to filter through the chamber windows, painting the walls in shades of gold and pink. It's going to be a beautiful day in Alexandria, the kind of day that makes you grateful to rule the greatest city in the world. But in this chamber, death is winning its ancient battle. Ptolemy Crosby's breathing becomes irregular, with longer pauses between each breath. His eyes flutter open one last time, focusing on your face with obvious effort. Sister, he whispers, barely audible. Remember me. Always. His grip on your hand loosens. His breathing becomes more shallow, more infrequent. The physicians check his pulse, exchange glances, and step back respectfully. The breathing stops. The senior physician approaches the bed, checks for a pulse, listens for breathing, and then straightens with the formal manner that announces the end of a reign. His Majesty Ptolemy XV has died, he announces quietly. May the gods receive his soul. The assembled servants and officials bow their heads in respect. Someone begins the traditional prayer for the dead. The business of preparing the body for mummification will begin soon. But for now, there's only silence in the chamber where the last male Ptolemy has died, leaving Egypt in the hands of his sister, who watched him die from poison she had administered, while holding his hand, and promising to find his killer. The reign of Ptolemy the Corset has ended. The sole rule of Cleopatra VII has begun, and the most dangerous part of this enterprise is just beginning. Day 3 of the Opet Festival, dawn. The moment the physician pronounces Ptolemy the Corset dead, the palace transforms into a carefully orchestrated machine of grief, investigation, and political maneuvering. You have perhaps 6 hours before the news spreads throughout Alexandria, and maybe 12 hours before it reaches Rome. Every moment between now and then must be managed with precision. The first priority is securing the narrative before anyone has time to ask inconvenient questions. "Captain," you address the guard commander, who's been waiting outside the chamber. "His Majesty has died. I want the palace sealed immediately. No one enters or leaves without my permission." "Of course, Your Majesty." "And the investigation?" Continues. "In fact, I want it accelerated. We need answers before the news spreads." Within an hour, the captain returns with news that is both encouraging and problematic. "Your Majesty, we've searched the Roman observers' quarters, as you requested." Weber found several items of interest. He produces the Syrian glass vials and forged letters you've so carefully prepared. Hidden beneath his sleeping couch, the vials contain traces of what appears to be hemlock extract. Perfect. The planted evidence is performing exactly as intended. And the Roman himself? Dead, Your Majesty. Died during the night, apparently from the same poison that killed His Majesty. This is inconvenient. Dead scapegoats are considerably more difficult to interrogate than live ones. But it also eliminates the possibility that Marcus might survive to contradict the narrative you've constructed. So we have 2 deaths from the same poison, evidence that the Roman had access to that poison, and correspondence suggesting he was involved in a plot against the royal family. Yes, Your Majesty. It appears he was planning to poison His Majesty, but accidentally poisoned himself in the process. The explanation is plausible, if not particularly elegant. Marcus was supposedly clever enough to plan a political assassination, but stupid enough to poison himself by accident. Still, it's the best narrative available given the circumstances. The second priority is managing the religious implications. The High Priest of Ptah arrives within 2 hours, his face grave with concern. "Your Majesty," he begins carefully, "the priests have been discussing the circumstances of His Majesty's death." "What kind of circumstance?" "The timing, primarily. The fact that he died during the Opet festival, while participating in sacred ceremonies, suggests divine judgment. This could go either way. Divine judgment could be interpreted as punishment for Ptolemy IV's supposed crimes, or as displeasure with the succession arrangements. Divine judgment upon whom? That's what we've been discussing. Some priests believe the gods were displeased with the Roman influence in the court. Others think the judgment was directed at those who would harm the royal family. Better. The priest is interpreting the situation as divine punishment for the Romans' crimes, not as divine displeasure with Ptolemy IV. And what of the succession? The gods have clearly indicated their preference. You remain as pharaoh, with Prince Caesarion as your heir. The dynasty continues as the gods intended. I see. And the other priests agree with this interpretation? Most do. The few who question it are reconsidering their positions. The third priority is the most delicate, managing the investigation by the Roman senator Gaius Octavius, who arrives at the palace gates claiming to be investigating Marcus's death. The meeting proves to be a careful exercise in selective truth-telling. Octavius is intelligent, experienced, and clearly suspicious about the circumstances of both deaths. "Your Majesty," he begins, "I appreciate your willingness to meet with me during this difficult time. Rome and Egypt have always cooperated in matters of mutual interest." Indeed. Now about the circumstances of Marcus's death. 2 deaths from the same poison at the same time, in the same palace. Unusual, wouldn't you say? The investigation suggests that Marcus was responsible for my brother's death, but accidentally poisoned himself in the process. So I've been told. But there are aspects of this explanation that trouble me. The conversation continues for an hour, with Octavius raising increasingly pointed questions about the evidence and timeline. You answer as best you can, but it's clear that he remains suspicious. "I've been examining the letters found in Marcus's quarters," he says finally. "The handwriting is interesting. Very formal, very careful. Not the kind of casual writing one would expect in private correspondence. Your heart stops. If Octavius can prove the letters are forgeries, the entire narrative collapses. But then he continues. Of course, Marcus was always formal in his writing. Even his personal notes were written as if they might be read by senators. Relief floods through you. Octavius has explained away his own suspicions about the handwriting. Are you satisfied with the investigation's conclusions, you ask? I'm satisfied that Marcus was responsible for both deaths, yes. Whether he was working alone or with accomplices, that's a question for Rome to investigate. Perfect. Let Rome investigate Roman conspiracies. That's not your problem. After Octavius leaves, you realize that the most dangerous part of this enterprise is nearly over. The narrative has been established, the evidence has been accepted, and the investigation is being redirected away from you toward Rome's internal politics. But there's still the matter of Caesarion's questions about his uncle's death. The 4-year-old has been asking why Uncle Ptolemy died, whether the same thing could happen to him, and whether you're in danger. Tell him, you instruct Apollodorus, that Uncle Ptolemy was very sick, that the doctors tried to help him, and that sometimes people die even when we don't want them to. Tell him that the bad man who made Uncle Ptolemy sick can't hurt anyone anymore, and that he's protected by the guards and the gods. And if he asks to see Uncle Ptolemy, tell him that Uncle Ptolemy is sleeping peacefully now, and that he'll see him again in the afterlife. The priests are taking care of him. By evening, the palace has settled into a new rhythm. The succession has been confirmed, the investigation has been concluded, and the diplomatic crisis has been averted. You've successfully eliminated your brother, framed a Roman observer, and secured your sole rule of Egypt. The price of this success was the life of your brother and the elaborate deception of an entire kingdom. Whether this was worth it depends on your perspective on the relative value of individual lives versus political stability. As you prepare for bed, you take a moment to visit Caesarion in his chambers. He's asleep, surrounded by the toys and scrolls that occupy his days, looking peaceful and secure in a way that had been impossible while Ptolemy Force's political ambitions remained a threat. You watch him sleep, thinking about the future you've secured for him and the price you've paid to ensure it. In 20 years, when he's ruling Egypt in his own right, will he understand the choices you've made? Will he appreciate the sacrifices required to maintain the independence of the kingdom? The questions have no immediate answers, but they're worth considering. Power, you've learned, is not something that can be secured permanently. It must be maintained, defended, and occasionally fought for. You return to your chambers, dismiss the servants, and settle down to review the day's final reports. The business of being pharaoh continues, regardless of the personal costs. As you work by lamplight, reviewing the last administrative details of this extraordinary day, you reflect on the curious nature of political success. You've achieved everything you set out to accomplish. Your brother is dead, the succession is secure, and Egypt remains independent. Yet the victory feels less complete than you'd expected. Perhaps this is the nature of political power. Each success creates new challenges, each solution generates new problems, and each victory requires further victories to maintain its value. Or perhaps it's simply the nature of fratricide. Having crossed one moral boundary, you're now aware of how many other boundaries exist, and how easily they might be crossed when circumstances require it. The lamp burns low as you finish your work, casting long shadows across the chamber. In the distance, you can hear the sounds of Alexandria at night, the harbour watch calling the hour, the temple bells marking the passage of time, the eternal rhythm of a great city that continues regardless of the personal struggles of its rulers. You are Cleopatra Servilius, Pharaoh of Egypt, beloved of Isis, and the most powerful woman in the world. You have preserved your dynasty, secured your kingdom, and eliminated your enemies through careful planning and ruthless execution. Whether this makes you a successful ruler or a successful murderer depends, perhaps, on the perspective of the observer. History, you suspect, will judge you by the results rather than the methods, and the results, by any measure, speak for themselves. You extinguish the lamp and prepare for sleep, knowing that tomorrow will bring new challenges, new decisions, and new opportunities to demonstrate your commitment to Egypt's welfare. After all, you've learned that ruling an empire requires more than just eliminating inconvenient brothers. It requires the daily work of governance, the careful management of priests and generals and merchants, the endless negotiations with Rome and Parthia and Nubia. But tonight at least you can sleep peacefully knowing that your son's future is secure and your dynasty will continue. The incenses bills for tomorrow's funeral ceremonies will be substantial, but some costs of power are more literal than others. Good night, Your Majesty. Pleasant dreams. Thank you for listening one last time. May your sleep be deep, your dreams quiet, and your mind at peace. Good night.